Welcome back. Here is the third video in the series, and in this particular video I'm going to be talking to you a little bit more about experiments, how experiments are done, and some of the factors that are involved in experiments that students frequently confuse. So let's get started. It's really important to understand that experiments are the only measure that we have, the only type of research that we have where we can prove causation. So the others, again, and I had mentioned this earlier, give us a lot of great data, but in experiments, we're actually going to try to determine a cause. So in an experiment, it's the only group where we're going to have a sample group, which we talked about in the last video, and half of that group or percentage of that group is going to be involved in the study, and everyone's going to be studied, but 50% or a percentage are going to have a factor or something that's going to be different, and the others are not. They're going to be in a control group. So only half of them will be in the actual experimental group. However, the people that are involved in the experiment won't know if they're in the experiment themselves or if they're in the control group. And this is really important so that they don't alter the study at all. So the two terms that students confuse sometimes are the independent and the dependent factors. The independent and the dependent factors or variables are only relevant to the experimental group. To the control group, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so it's only in the experimental group where we're going to change a particular factor. So I'm going to make up a research here. I'm going to say, one of the things I've noticed in my daughter's school, and one of the things that they're looking at is the possibility that students may learn better certain lessons when they have their headphones on. I know this because I've had to buy her now 3 sets of headphones, and it's only December. But if it's truly improving her learning, I'm okay with it. If it's not, I'm not so great with it. But whether or not that works or not, I don't know. It's an interesting concept. We've always done lectures, and I've always gone to school where the professor taught. They're doing a lot of things through headphones and videos, and they're doing a lot of learning that way. So what you would have to do is, if I wanted to determine if children learned, let's say, for example, math better, I would have to have the whole group of children in there. They'd have to have equal chances to get picked or not picked. I might have to pick out women and men to make sure it was equal. For example, in my daughter's school, being a STEM school, or just being the way that it came out this year, her class is 80% boys. So we want to make sure we have enough girls in there to get a clean factor to see if that's secondary information. So we would need to have all the people in there, have the equal numbers, and then have everybody use headsets. Only some of them might be using it for a reading, some of it using it for math, so that the students don't know when they're being studied. If some know they're being studied with headsets and some don't, they could throw off the study that way. So it's important that they not know. Even though we're not going to study the reading, it's just auxiliary, it doesn't mean anything to that study unless we're gathering that information for a further study. We're only studying the math. So we're going to gather that data, but it's important that everybody have a headset on because it would be clear who was and who wasn't in that group. And then I would have to have my unit of analysis. So let's say I'm going to use my unit of analysis as their final score, their score in their final exam. That's what I'm going to use as my unit of analysis. And I'm going to state that I believe, I hypothesize, the students will perform better in general on if they had the headsets on. So then I just look at their scores at the end of the time. It's pretty straightforward. We could also do something like leaving it optional if they used their headsets or didn't use their headsets, and then observed in the classroom and then looked at the scores of those who did, who didn't. Those are all different ways we might gather that same data to look at the research. But we're looking at causation. So in this case, a certain group cannot have it, a certain group can. I'm going to get those numbers, I'm going to compare those numbers, I'm going to say that this factor, this only factor that I changed, I believed caused those different results. But what's really important when we do that is that we make sure that we have internal and external validity. We already talked about what validity is, and it means simply that we're measuring what we're supposed to be measuring. So in internal validity, we need to make sure that there isn't another factor, there isn't anything else going on that could be confusing our data. So we might have to repeat that study multiple different times. What if we were only doing that particular study at a particular time, right after gym or right before gym or something like that? Could those other factors be affecting the students' learning, whether it was before lunch or after lunch? we wouldn't want one group to be using it before and one group to be using it after. We would want to make sure that we're getting rid of all the other factors that could be confusing the student. Is there a lot of activity going on during one time and quiet during another time? So we have to make sure that everything for the best of our ability is equal amongst both groups to make sure there's not something else that we're measuring by accident while we're trying to get the data on the headphones. External validity simply means, is the data applicable to the rest of the world? So whether or not headphones help you improve your scores for your math exam, that's good to know. But if it doesn't mean anything moving forward, what does it really matter? I'm not going to be taking a math exam moving forward. But if we take that data and we say we believe it helps with studying, period, and then we're going to apply it to a different grade, and we're going to apply it to college students, and we're going to apply it to different groups of people, and we determine that headphones actually make studying a better tool, and it works not just in math but in reading, watch how many of you guys run out and go grab yourself some headsets. For $13 I can improve my learning. I'm going to go do that. So it may be valid information and it may apply and help the rest of it, but if it only works for kindergartners in math class, again, that's valuable, but it's pretty much contained to that group. So we want to look at the external validity. Is what I'm studying going to help us outside of that particular setting or not? We also, something else that we're going to be looking at, and you heard me refer to a couple of different times, is field research. Field research is great. We've got experiments. We've now reviewed those. We have correlational studies. Those are where we're going to be gathering data that already exist out in the world. And this class looked entirely different just 10 years ago and worlds different 25 years ago. We can now access data from so many different places at our fingertips, from libraries, from information from across the world. We can cross-study, we can compare things, we can pull it up right there at our computers. It wasn't always the case. So we may be looking at data and comparing it, and that's how we're going to gather data that already exists. In field research is when we're going to actually be going out and trying to see or observe something to get information. You heard me refer to a field research on recycling. If I wanted to drive around a particular neighborhood and count the houses that recycled. If I walked into a classroom or had a camera in a classroom and just observed how many kids put on their headphones versus didn't put on their headphones. So field research can be really important. It's just important that we don't alter the experiment at all. So we're simply observing a natural phenomenon that already exists. So we can go to a playground, we can go to a mall, and we can people watch and look for a particular thing. But we can't alter it. If we do anything to alter it, now we're looking at an experiment instead of just field research. So if we were looking at how many people wear red on Christmas Eve, we would find our groups of people and figure out what they're wearing. So very, very valuable. Gives us a lot of great data. But again, we just have to be careful that we're not altering it. And survey research is the other area in which we do research. Survey research is very, very helpful. It's most important if our surveys are quick and short. People simply don't want to engage in longer surveys. It's inexpensive research, and again, this looked entirely different just 5 or 10 years ago. Now we have so many researchers that we can do just on the internet. You can just grab somebody or blast people. And if people feel that their opinion is helpful and it doesn't take too much time, then they're usually willing to do that. So it's important that we can gather lots and lots of data, and we have many programs and systems now that we can just input that data and get the results, and we can change it up and we can move it a lot of different ways, and it's not as overwhelming as it used to be. This course just 20 years ago would have been very overwhelming, as you'd have to do all the math yourself as well. But now we have programs to do that so you can breathe a sigh of relief. It is important, though, that when we use surveys, again, that we use closed-ended questions or Likert scales or something similar. You don't want to use too many open-ended questions simply because you're going to be looking at thousands and thousands of different possible responses, and it's going to be very difficult to categorize them or assume that you know what the person meant when they wrote that, even assuming you could read what the results were. Questions have to be very, very clear, very direct, and you don't have any ambiguity with them. You also don't want any double-barreled questions, if this, then that. You don't want to do that because they might be part of it and they may feel positive about, part of it negative, and now you forced them into an answer. So very clear, very direct, and ask them only one particular thing at a time. The shorter the questions, the better. The clearer language, the better. And you want to avoid things such as negative, double negatives, slang, or any kind of talk that may be professional talk that the average person wouldn't understand what that meant, like initials or things like that. Spacing and neatness count. If they look at we've all done it. You looked at a survey and went, oh yeah, I'm not doing that. It's way too big. It's way too much work. Short and sweet, simple, we're more likely to do it and more likely to be honest. We want to be careful that we're not doing anything that leads them either. We don't want to highlight certain things. We don't want to make certain things a different color or a bigger font or anything like that that could draw their eye to it or draw their attention or make them feel like that was the answer they were supposed to give. The instructions also need to be very, very clear, and we have to be clear with our distribution method. For this particular class, I'm probably going to encourage you to use some method like the SurveyMonkey. You can use your own accounts and emails and things like that, which is great. But again, it's only to learn how to do research. If you were doing true research, we wouldn't want to narrow the research only to your friend base, unless, of course, you had millions of followers. And probably most of you don't. And so with that regard, we probably have people that may have like-minded thinking to you or somehow have something that's associated with you, which is why they are your friends, and so it can narrow those parameters. So we would be really careful when we do something like that to make sure we're truly getting a random pool in doing research like that. But online research is great because it comes right into a database and can be sorted through, and it can be a great, great tool. We'll talk more about that in class or in your book. You'll see that as well. If we are doing interviews, which is the other way which we can do information, and we talked about that, it's very important too. Do not mislead the interviewee. You don't want to wear a shirt saying you're representing a particular company. They might feel like they were supposed to answer in a certain way. So you want to be as plain and neutral as you possibly can while still being neat. You don't want to show any bias or opinion when surveying the people any more than you want it in a written survey. So you don't want to stress that they should answer a certain way or encourage them to answer in a certain way. It's important that you are familiar with that survey if you're going to be reading it to someone, or over the phone if you're struggling with certain things. They're going to pick up on that as well. Here again, the wording is very important, and it's limited probing. You can clarify a word if somebody didn't understand it, but you don't want to mislead them or give them information you wouldn't give anybody else. So you have to be careful with the amount of probing that you're able to do. Again, it's going to be very good. It can be very informative. It can help us to gather information for voting, for medical purposes, for advertising, for many opinion different based things. But we have to look at the masses too. We don't just want to study 10 people. We've got to study a lot of people. And then we're going to kind of fall to that central average, realizing that we always have outliers. It's also important to realize that when you do phone research in particular, or web these days, we have to be careful that we're not getting a child population. There are a lot of children out there, and so we want to make sure that we're targeting the population so we want to find some kind of a qualifier, if possible, that we're not picking up a bunch of children if you're trying to study an adult opinion. If you're trying to study children, make sure that you have the right permissions to do so. And always remember, whenever we're doing research, regardless of the type of research we're doing, if it's an experiment, if it's a survey, that we must abide by ethical guidelines and ensure we're causing no harm, keeping confidentiality, allowing people to leave the research if they choose to leave the research, and that we are debriefing it. So hopefully that was helpful. I'll see you back soon for our final video.